With us nearing towards the new regulations in 2026, it's worth discussing the recent articles and what's being spoken about from the actual directors making the 2026 regulations. This will be a different set of cars. Even if they look kind of similar, they will perform a lot differently and they will have a lot bigger benefits, in my opinion, to the current cars that we have right now. Before getting into the video, wanted to thank you guys. We're really close to 15K, so thank you so much for supporting the channel. Please subscribe if you're new here, it would mean a lot to me. Let's get into the 2026 video. So I already made a video talking about the 2026 car and really the official renders that we had for it from AMUS. Now, a couple more things have came out that I think is very good to discuss about this, and it gives us an even better picture of these 2026 cars. So here's an actual up angle of the Audi 2026 render next to the RB19. It gives you an idea of how the cars will stack up against each other from its shorter width to length, showing you the smaller measurements for the car and why I think this will be much better for racing. Now, when you look here, you do see a pretty wide floor. That is because they are going with a in-wash concept. For an in-wash concept, you're going to need a little bit of a larger platform, so it'll probably be a little bit restrictive on how much they can go into the car. Obviously, the cars that we currently have right now are pretty much outwash concepts when the floor is being talked about, and that is why more dirty air is kind of being made, especially with more downforce on the car. With the in-wash concept, most of that air is getting drawn back straight through rather than through the side, causing that dirty air. The more air being drawn back through the middle will obviously mean a bigger slipstream effect as well for the cars from behind. And the initial talk for weight saving target of 20 to 30 kilograms, which was kind of spoken about in the beginning, and I said it in my past video for the 2026 cars, is now being aimed more at a 40 to 50 kilogram for the 2026 cars. Now, this is much better for racing. The lighter the car, the better potential for people to throw in the car, more of a driving style technique that will be more interesting for the future, so other drivers could excel a lot harder. With these overweight cars, I mean, obviously they're not overweight in standards of what the weight limit is, but they're overweight in comparison to what we used to have. We had cars at some point at 500 kilograms. Now we're at that 700 mark and pretty much hitting the 800 mark. So going 50 kilos down is a big thing. It's definitely going to help out with racing, but as I said, also helping the drivers throw in the car into corners, and some other drivers will excel better at this. I still think this would suit a driving style like Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, but I do think it also suits that heavy braking style like Lewis Hamilton. It really all depends, and it could change up the grid for an even better way, in my opinion. But the even bigger things and what is revealed by the FIA on their real radical, I guess you can say, plan to fix up these 2026 cars, and what is being spoken about by Nicholas Tobias. So what he's saying for the lighter and shorter cars in 2026. In this article, he pretty much discusses aerodynamics, active aero that we'll get into more towards the end of the video, but how they're going to improve the chassis as well. He talks about the car being, as I said, it's going to be smaller. I showed you that comparison of the RB19 and what the 2026 cars are supposedly supposed to look like. Now, these cars are 100 kilograms heavier than the 2014 cars that we had. So 50 kilograms lighter will be more towards the 2021 to 2017 era, which would be much better in that way because those cars were lighter. You could throw them in a little bit better, a little bit less weight. But a bigger thing being spoken about with the chassis and really the ride heights and so on is that there will be a significant decrease in the downforce. Now, downforce is great for high-speed corners. It makes the cars look super alive. But the more downforce on a car, the less overtaking we will see and the more dirty air that is being produced. Downforce produces dirty air, especially if it's made in specific ways and it's outwashed from the side of the tires rather than being inwashed through the back of the rear wing and the beam wing. So them reducing the downforce will help with racing as well. It will make it more difficult going into corners to actually be able to defend for the drivers that are in front with the less dirty air. Plus also braking zones will be much better because now it's more reliant on how steady you are on the pedal, but also the harder you're hitting that braking zone will be much more efficient for you. With more downforce, it's much harder to overtake in these high speed corners. That's why tracks like Suzuka get very little overtaking with the exception of like turn 1. but we could see a lot more. It was a better track, I think, this year than it was last year. It was in the rain last year, but there were very little overtakes. A lot of tracks suffer from this whole entire high speed thing. Even in Monza, the car suffered going through the Parabolica at the very last turn to get them on the straight because there was so much dirty air being produced. And while these cars aren't on the level of the 2021 cars, they are still pretty bad at all the air that's still being thrown back to the back of the car. It just makes the car super unstable and you can't take the corner how you'd like to. Usually drivers will avoid this by taking a different line, but that different line will obviously be slower and it is much harder to then get behind the car, get into that slipstream effect. There are plenty of reasons why lowering the weight and actually lowering the downforce, in my opinion, and to every other driver's opinion, is a good thing. Now, from the aerodynamic side, speaking about it, when you're looking at this car, as I said, it's a in-wash concept from the floor to the upper part with its front wing, meaning that I said with in-wash, that means that the air is getting pulled towards the middle of the car and it's trying to go out from the rear wing and the beam wing. That is where you want most of the air to be produced to produce less of a dirty air effect. Now, there are other ways of producing this dirty air. We saw it in 2021 with the rear wings. They're still keeping an open rear wing rather than having those kind of stools on the side, which was made in 2022 by Aston Martin. That was kind of the loophole that they had, but that produced even more dirty air, so it was harder to catch the Aston Martin car. That was a draggy car, so it doesn't really matter how much dirty air it was producing. It was slow on the straights, even slower than an F2 car at some points, which to me is just abysmal that they somehow made a car perform like that. But the biggest things that I wanted to discuss and what was discussed a lot in this article and recent rumors that have came out about active aero is for the car, they're discussing DRS and how that should work. At some point it was being discussed that the person in front should have like a DRS effectiveness, but actually making the car a bit slower while the other person isn't opening its rear wing. But now the new things that are being discussed and what Nicholas even talks about here is that the case for DRS could have aids. So it could have like different ways that the airstream is going through, not just through the rear wing, but parts of the diffuser. They're saying that the front wing might move as well. Now these are rumors and it's being discussed about potentially what it could be, but it comes from some pretty high sources that actually know what they're speaking about and usually get these things right. With the diffuser being open and being active or the front wing, this will make the weight of the car, I guess, the distribution of it a bit different because with active parts, it's going to be a little bit on the more way side. And if not, then we could see some faults in that, like we have seen with the DRS. When teams try making the rear wing even smaller than it usually is, that can cause for a problem sometimes. So it could make interesting for a couple of mechanical failures. Some more elements that with mechanism could be a worrying factor for teams, but it makes for more innovation. That's kind of what I like. I like that there's more innovation being produced within these 2026 cars. I feel like the new regulations, well, they're not new anymore, but what it is, these 2022 to 2025 regulations, they're very restrictive. But Adrian Newey has pointed out that when you look into the deeper details, you can do a lot with these cars. And it does seem like other teams are grabbing onto it. Look at where Red Bull is. Everybody's pretty close in qualifying. Hopefully everybody picks up on it for 2024. But 2026 already seems much more innovative than the past regulations. And obviously with engines being worked on now as well, that will add another element of effect. But active aero is also being spoken about for suspension and what it could do there. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments for really what's being talked about with this 2026 cars. I thought this article was super interesting, and in general, everything about 2026 is interesting. I can't wait to see when Formula 1 actually puts out the car, and I'll discuss about that, obviously. But the bigger thing is the 2024 car is coming out soon, and I'll obviously be covering all of those, from Haas all the way to Red Bull. So leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.